It is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker tonight. It's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Nancy T. Ammerman. She's a professor of Sociology of Religion, School of Theology, and Department of Sociology at Boston University since 2003. From 2007 to the present, she is a chair of the Department of Sociology at Boston University. She received her PhD from Yale University in 1983. Dr. Nancy Ammerman has spent much of the last decade studying American congregations. Her most recent book, Pillars of Faith, American Congregations and Their Partners, from University of California Press in 2005, describes the common patterns that shape the work of Americans' diverse communities of faith. This book was a winner of the 2005 Distinguished Book Award, Sociology of Religion section, American Sociology Association. Prior to her work on congregations, she wrote extensively on conservative religious movements, including the book Bible Believers, Fundamentalists in the Modern World, a study of the Independent Baptist Church in New England, and Baptist Battles, Social Change and Religious Conflict in the Southern Baptist Convention, which received the 1992 Distinguished Book Award from the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion. Her talk tonight is entitled The Religious Landscape and Its Implication for Pastoral Leadership. Let us give a warm welcome to Dr. Nancy Ammerman.
Thank you so much, Dr. Castor, and I really have to say how honored I am to be here among you. The comment earlier about reading the essays that you all are going to be discussing, honest to goodness, they really are exciting. This is exciting work that you're doing, and it's really a privilege for me to have an opportunity to listen in a bit, but also to have the opportunity to set some of the context for what it is that this very important work is all about. What I want to do tonight for the next few minutes is really try to look at a key question, simply, what is the context in which you are doing this work as lay ecclesial ministers? And I'm going to give you a bit of a preview. Others over the course of these days will have an opportunity to talk about the theology. Tonight we're going to talk about the sociology. But the key point for what I want to do tonight is simply to emphasize two things. One is that your task is in fact very difficult. And I want to lay out some of the reasons why it is a very challenging task that lies ahead of you. But I also want to emphasize the degree to which what you are doing in forming people and communities of faith is more important than it has ever been before. So let's start out with the more difficult part. Let's start out by simply recalling to our minds some of the things that probably are not going to be news to you. Just reminding ourselves of the degree to which our notion of how it is that a parish gets formed and what the social and cultural underpinnings for that are have changed really dramatically over the last couple of generations. The very notion of what a community is, what it looks like, how it works. One of the factors in that is simply geographic mobility. It is simply the fact that people move. So how often do people move? Oh my, it's a little too small, I'm sorry. The big blue part is the people who stay put in any given 5-year period. In this case, the 5 years from 2005 through 2009. But over that average 5-year period, about 1 in 6 people in the United States changes residence. 1 in 6 moves. And about 1 in 10 moves across county lines. So if you think about county lines as being basically, too far to still come back to your parish, about 1 in 10 of the population moves too far to keep coming every 5 years. You're going to have a constantly circulating population of people just in your geography. Now, that's actually not new. That basic rate of movement has been pretty steady since World War II. But one of the things we need to pay particular attention to today is the degree to which that is especially true for our young adult population. For 18 to 35-year-olds, it's not 1 in 6 every 5 years, it's 1 in 3 every 5 years. And again, many of them moving significantly across geography. And one of the reasons that that's the case is that the job market is the way it is these days. That people don't start a job at age 18 or 21 or 22 and stick with the same company over their whole lifetimes. They are moving very often, very constantly, and particularly young adults. In one survey, we discovered that 66% of 20-somethings had been in their current job 2 years or less. And 42% of 30-somethings have been in their job 2 years or less. That's a lot of job mobility going on. And that's part of what's driving the geographic mobility, of course, as well. Now, one of the other things, of course, to recognize about those young adults is that they're not quite settling down the way we came to expect people to settle down. And it turns out that people still hold in their heads a pretty common set of cultural definitions about what constitutes being a real adult. A real adult has a full-time job, has moved away from mom and dad, is married, starting to have kids. But people aren't doing that when they're 25. That's getting spread out over a much longer period of time. They may be moving back with mom and dad from time to time. Yeah, I see heads nodding. Yes, we know about that. So the culture still has these expectations about what being a real adult is, but the reality of young adulthood is such that this movement through relationships, through jobs, through places of residence is much more volatile, much more fluid than it has been in the past. So community, nailing people down, getting them to stay put, hard to do. But even when they're staying put, they're relating to each other differently than they have in the past. The way we network is, of course, partly driven by things like Facebook and MySpace and all of the rest, email, but it's also, it has been for a very long time the case that people who live in cities especially think about their community, their relationships with friends and family as something that they construct themselves, and it's not necessarily, again, neighbors that are forming this community. People are staying in touch with each other by phone, by occasional visits, by email, by social network. And they have as many relationships, and everything we know about those relationships tells us that they actually are quite solid and nurturing and important relationships. They're just not the same kind of, well, you live next door to me and we went to the same school together relationships. They're constructed, they're voluntary. And people for a very long time in the US have thought about choosing their church in much the same way that people think about choosing their friends and where they live and so forth. And as you well know, even Catholics think about choosing their church now in ways that they may not have a generation or two ago. But it's not just about different networks. It's also about the very nature of the community that we live in, the society we live in as in the US. We are, in fact, a more diverse society than we have been in the past, especially in the post-1965 immigration period. Religiously, the US has always been a diverse place. We have always been a place that rather than having a single religious tradition that everybody in the society was a part of, we've been a place that has been this grand experiment of bringing people of different religious traditions together in one society and trying to make a society out of that. But we are more religiously diverse in the post-1965 period than we have been before. We have Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, other religious traditions have become much more visible. We've been reminded that we're not just a Christian and Jewish society. The stream of immigration that has taken place over the last 40 years has introduced lots of diversity, ethnic and diversity in terms of where people are from, that is relatively new in the experience of adults in American society. We now have about 12.5% of the population that we know of that were born outside the US. That's about the same proportion of the population that was, quote, foreign-born, that's the way the census talks about them, now as 100 years ago. But 100 years ago, where those people came from was very different. That big yellow blob, that's Europe, 100 years ago. Look at the yellow blob now. If you think about the difference in where the people who are coming to this country are from, it's really quite dramatic. And that has introduced a sense of the US struggling with who are we? What does community mean? When we can't assume that everybody is at least eventually going to be white and English-speaking, and oh yeah, there are those African Americans too. And that's kind of the way, you know, Americans have thought about their sense of who we were ethnically for so much of our history. And we're rethinking. The notion of what community means is being renegotiated. The top 10 sending countries in the US now include, of course, Mexico, but also China, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Jamaica, Korea. And one of the interesting things about this flow of immigration is that, on the one hand, it has made us more aware that we're religiously diverse, that we're not just Christians and Jews. But it has also included a disproportionate number of Christian immigrants. Most of the countries that are sending us most of the migrants are in fact dominantly Christian countries.